Every parent knows the terror of watching their child slip away while feeling powerless to help. For Astrid, that nightmare becomes reality when her daughter falls deathly ill in the middle of nowhere, their wagon broken, hope fading with each labored breath. When a giant Viking warrior appears on the ridge, she begs for his help. His answer shocks her. He'll save them both, but only if she agrees to marry him. What seems like a cruel bargain from a lonely stranger runs much deeper. This man once fought beside her dead husband and carries secrets that could change everything. As they travel through dangerous lands, a desperate mother, a sick child, and a mysterious warrior discover that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. But what really happened between this giant and her husband all those years ago? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The broken wheel lay like a severed limb beside the wagon, its iron rim twisted beyond any hope of repair. Astrid knelt in the dust, her calloused hands running over the splintered wood as if her touch alone could mend what the rocky highland terrain had destroyed. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the barren landscape, where scraggly juniper bushes and wind-carved stones offered the only relief from an endless expanse of rust-colored earth. Inside the wagon, wrapped in every blanket they possessed, 10-year-old Freya burned with fever. Her small chest rose and fell in shallow, rapid breaths that tore at her mother's heart, with each struggling gasp. The child's golden hair, so like her father's, lay matted against her forehead, darkened with sweat. Her lips moved soundlessly, lost in fevered dreams that seemed to transport her far from this desolate place. 3 days ago, their journey had begun with such promise. Astrid had loaded the wagon with the finest wool she'd spun through the long winter months, along with intricate tapestries that had taken her years to complete. The trading settlement of Havenbrook lay 5 days' travel through the highland passes, where merchants from distant lands gathered each summer to exchange goods. The coins she'd earn would see them through another winter, perhaps even allow her to hire help for the next harvest. She had made this journey before, back when Bjorn was alive. Her husband had been a bear of a man, with laughing eyes and hands, gentle enough to braid their daughter's hair each morning. Together, they had built a small but prosperous life in the valley below these hills. He would drive the wagon while she walked alongside, pointing out wildflowers to Freya or singing the old songs her grandmother had taught her. But that was before the war came to their door. Before the king's messengers arrived with promises of glory and threats for those who refused the call. Before Bjorn kissed his wife and daughter goodbye one frost-bright morning and never returned home. The notification of his death had come from a grizzled veteran whose own scars told stories of battles fought in distant lands. Died with honor, the man had said, his weathered face kind but tired. Fought alongside the best of them. You can be proud. Pride, Astrid had discovered, was cold comfort on winter nights when the roof leaked and there was no one to mend it. Pride didn't plant the barley or harvest it when her back screamed from the work. Pride didn't answer Freya's whispered questions about when Papa was coming home. For 3 years now, she had managed alone. She'd learned to handle the plow, to negotiate with traders, to make decisions that once belonged to 2 people. The work was endless and exhausting, but it was hers. Independence had become both her shield and her burden. The trading journey was to be proof that she could do anything Bjorn had done. She'd planned every detail, from the route to the supplies. What she hadn't planned for was the pack of wolves that had spooked the horses 2 nights ago, causing them to bolt and crash the wagon into the rocky outcropping that destroyed the wheel. The horses were gone, vanished into the wilderness. Their water was nearly depleted, and Freya's fever had worsened with each passing hour. Now, as the sun climbed higher and her daughter's breathing grew more labored, Astrid faced the truth she'd been fighting since dawn. They would not survive another day in this wasteland without help. That's when she saw him, a dark silhouette cresting the ridge to the north. At first, she thought it might be a standing stone, one of the ancient markers that dotted these highlands. But then the figure moved, descending the slope with the measured gait of someone who knew this harsh country well. As he drew closer, Astrid's breath caught. The man was enormous, easily a head taller than any warrior she'd ever seen. His shoulders were broad as an ox yoke, his arms thick as tree trunks. Long hair, the color of winter wheat, hung past his shoulders, braided with leather cords and small bones that clicked softly as he walked. His beard was full and carefully tended, marking him as a man of some standing rather than a wild hermit of the mountains. But it was his eyes that gave her pause, pale blue like glacier ice, but warm with an intelligence that spoke of depth and careful thought. He wore simple traveling clothes of good wool and leather, well made but showing the wear of long journeys. At his side hung a magnificent battle axe, its handle worn smooth by years of use. He approached slowly, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. When he was still a dozen paces away, he stopped and spoke in a voice deep as distant thunder. "You are far from any settlement, lady. Your wagon appears to have met with misfortune." His accent held the musical quality of the northern fjords, but his words were careful and precise. This was no crude mountain dweller, despite his size and weathered appearance. Astrid rose to her feet, unconsciously straightening her shoulders in a gesture Bjorn had always called her shield maiden stance. Desperation warred with dignity in her chest. She needed help, but accepting it would mean acknowledging defeat. "The wheel is broken beyond repair," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Our horses bolted. My daughter, she's very ill." The giant's pale eyes softened with what looked like genuine concern. "May I see the child?" The question surprised her. Most men would have focused on the practical matters first, the broken wagon, the missing horses, the supplies. Instead, this stranger's first thought was for Freya's well-being. Astrid nodded, leading him to the wagon. Inside, Freya lay still as death, her small face flushed with fever. The giant studied her for a long moment, then gently placed the back of his hand against her forehead. His touch was surprisingly delicate for such massive hands. "How long has she been like this?" he asked quietly. 2 days, getting worse. I've tried everything I know, but..." Astrid's voice broke slightly, before she forced it steady again. "I don't have the medicines she needs." The stranger straightened, his expression thoughtful. "There is a town called Mill Haven, 3 days' journey to the southeast. They have a healer there, a woman skilled in treating such fevers." Hope flickered in Astrid's chest, followed immediately by despair. 3 days' journey with no wagon, no horses. She won't survive it. She might, with proper care and transport. The giant's eyes met hers directly. "I could help you reach Millhaven safely." I have some coin," Astrid said quickly, though she knew it wasn't much. "Whatever you think fair." He held up one massive hand, stopping her words. "I require no coin for such service." Relief flooded through her, so intense it made her legs weak. "Then what?" "Only this." His voice remained gentle, but something in his tone made her heart skip. "Promise me that when we reach Millhaven safely, and your daughter is well again, you will marry me." The words hit her like a physical blow. Astrid staggered back a step, staring at this massive stranger who had just proposed marriage to a woman he'd met mere minutes before. "What?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "I will pull your wagon myself if need be," he continued calmly, as if he'd just offered to help with an everyday task. "I will guard you both through the dangerous passes. I know these lands well, and I know how to keep a fever from worsening. But my price is your hand in marriage." Astrid's mind reeled. "You're mad. You don't even know my name." "Astrid, wife of Bjorn the Steadfast, mother of Freya." His pale eyes never wavered from hers. "You lived in Thornwood Valley before the war took your husband. You weave the finest tapestries in 3 kingdoms, and you've been managing your farm. Alone for 3 years now." The blood drained from her face. How could you possibly know? Promise me, he said again, his voice still gentle but carrying an undertone of iron. Your daughter's life hangs in the balance. Promise me your hand, and I will see you both safe to Millhaven. In the wagon, Freya whimpered softly, her small body shivering despite the blazing sun. The sound cut through Astrid like a blade. Her daughter was dying. This strange giant offered salvation, but at a price that made no sense. Why? She whispered. Why would you want to marry someone you don't know? Something flickered across his weathered features, pain, perhaps, or regret. I have my reasons, lady. Do you accept? Astrid looked at her daughter's fever-flushed face, then back at the mysterious giant who somehow knew far too much about her life. Every instinct screamed that this was madness, that no good could come from binding herself to a stranger through such a bargain. But Freya stirred restlessly, her breathing growing more labored, and the choice became no choice at all. I promise, she said, the words tasting like ashes in her mouth. When my daughter is well, and we reach Millhaven safely, I will marry you. The giant nodded solemnly, as if sealing a treaty between kingdoms. My name is Stenvar, he said, and I give you my word as a warrior that no harm will come to either of you while you travel under my protection. As he moved toward their broken wagon with purposeful strides, Astrid clutched her worn silver wedding ring, the last connection to the life she'd built with Bjorn, and wondered what manner of bargain she'd just made with this mountain of a man. True to his word, Stenvar transformed their desperate situation with the efficiency of a man accustomed to solving problems through action rather than contemplation. He fashioned a crude harness from rope and leather strips, positioning himself where the horses should have been. The sight of this giant of a man preparing to pull their wagon like a beast of burden struck Astrid as both humbling and surreal. But first, he tended to Freya with surprising gentleness. From a leather pouch at his belt, he produced dried willow bark and other herbs Astrid didn't recognize. He brewed a bitter tea over a small fire, then coaxed the semi-conscious child to drink it in tiny sips. This will help with the fever, he explained to Astrid, his massive hands steady as he held the cup to Freya's lips. But she needs proper rest and cooler air. We'll travel by night when possible. Astrid watched in amazement as her daughter's labored breathing gradually eased. The tea worked faster than any remedy she'd tried, and for the first time in days, hope began to kindle in her chest. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Stenvar lifted Freya as if she weighed no more than a feather, settling her on soft furs in the wagon bed. He'd arranged their belongings to create a comfortable nest, ensuring she would be shielded from the worst jolts of the journey. Rest while you can, he told Astrid. I'll pull us through the night. The air will be cooler, better for the child. You can't possibly pull this wagon alone for 3 days, Astrid protested, though she'd already seen evidence of his remarkable strength. Stenvar's pale eyes crinkled at the corners, the first hint of humor she'd seen from him. I've pulled heavier loads through worse terrain. This wagon is well made, but not overly burdened. As darkness fell across the highlands, their strange procession began. Stenvar moved with the steady rhythm of someone accustomed to long marches, the wagon wheels turning smoothly behind him. Astrid walked alongside, marveling at how he seemed to know every stone and rut in the path, even in the dim starlight. How do you know these roads so well? She asked during one of their brief rests. I've traveled them many times over the years, he replied, checking the wagon's contents with practiced care. Trade routes, military campaigns, personal journeys. The highlands hold few secrets from me. Something in his tone suggested deeper familiarity with this harsh country, but before Astrid could pursue the subject, Freya stirred in the wagon. Her fever had broken sometime during the night, and though she remained weak, her breathing was steady and natural once more. The second day passed in a haze of grateful exhaustion. Stenvar's herbal remedies continued to work their magic, and Freya was able to take small amounts of food and water. She even managed a weak smile when Stenvar carved a tiny wooden horse from a piece of birch, his enormous fingers surprisingly deft with the small knife. "Papa used to carve animals for me," Freya whispered, her voice still hoarse from illness. Stenvar's hands stilled for a moment. Did he now? What manner of animals? Horses, mostly, and sometimes wolves, but Mama said those were too frightening for bedtime. "Your papa was wise," Stenvar said gently, resuming his carving. "Horses are good companions for dreams." As the child drifted back to sleep, clutching her new toy, Astrid found herself studying this enigmatic man who had burst into their lives. Everything about him suggested careful education and refinement, despite his intimidating size and warrior's bearing. His speech was too precise for a common soldier, his knowledge of healing too extensive for casual learning. That evening, as they made camp beside a clear mountain stream, Astrid's world shifted forever. She'd been refilling their water skins when her eyes fell upon the battle axe at Stenvar's side. The weapon was beautiful, its head polished to mirror brightness, its handle carved with intricate knotwork. But it wasn't the craftsmanship that made her breath catch in her throat. It was the distinctive pattern etched into the steel, a design she knew as well as her own heartbeat. The axe belonged to Bjorn. Her hands trembled as she approached Stenvar, who was tending the small fire with his back to her. "Where did you get that weapon?" He didn't turn around, but his shoulders tensed. "Which weapon?" "The axe. That was my husband's battle axe. I watched him oil that blade every evening for 5 years. I know every mark on the handle, every line of the carving." Her voice grew stronger with each word, fueled by a mixture of grief and growing anger. "How do you come to carry a dead man's weapon?" Slowly, Stenvar rose to his full height and turned to face her. In the firelight, his pale eyes seemed to glow with their own inner light. "Your husband was my shield brother, Astrid. We fought together in the king's wars." The simple statement hit her like a physical blow. "That's impossible. Bjorn never mentioned anyone named Stenvar. He told me about his companions Eric the quick-witted, Magnus Redbeard, young Olaf who sang like a bird. He never spoke of you." Pain flickered across Stenvar's weathered features. Perhaps he had his reasons. What reasons? Astrid's voice rose, causing Freya to stir in the wagon. She lowered it to an urgent whisper. "What reasons could there be? And how do you know so much about our life, our farm, our understanding dawned like a cold sunrise? You've been watching us, haven't you? For how long?" Stenvar was quiet for a long moment, staring into the dancing flames. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested years of carried burdens. "I gave Bjorn my word that if anything happened to him, I would ensure his family was protected. Finding you in danger, your child ill, far from help, it was as if the gods themselves had arranged our meeting. Your word?" Astrid stepped closer, her hands clenched into fists. "What kind of word? What arrangement did you make with my husband that I knew nothing about?" "The kind that warriors make when death stalks the battlefield," Stenvar replied quietly. "The kind that ensures loved ones don't face the world alone. I haven't been alone." The words burst from her with all the frustration and pride of 3 hard years. "I've managed perfectly well by myself. I didn't need your protection or your marriage proposal or your mysterious watching from the shadows." "Perhaps not," Stenvar acknowledged. "But you needed my help yesterday when your daughter lay dying and your water ran low. Would your pride have saved her life?" The question stopped Astrid's angry words in her throat. He was right, and they both knew it. Without his intervention, Frasier would likely have died in that wasteland. "Why marriage?" she asked finally, her anger deflating into exhausted confusion. "If this is about some promise to Bjorn, why not simply offer help and go your way?" Stenvar's pale eyes met hers directly. "Because a promise of marriage ensures permanent protection. A widow with a child faces many dangers, raiders, harsh winters, men who would take advantage of perceived weakness. As my wife, you would never face such threats again." "And what do you gain from this arrangement?" Astrid's voice was sharp with suspicion. "A woman you barely know, a child who isn't yours, a life bound by duty rather than choice. For a moment, something raw and vulnerable flickered in Stenvar's expression, a glimpse of the man beneath the warrior's controlled facade. I gain the chance to keep a promise to a friend who died protecting others. I gain the opportunity to honor his memory by ensuring his family's safety. His memory. Astrid's voice grew dangerous. Or your guilt. Stenvar's silence was answer enough. Whatever had happened in that distant battle, whatever circumstances had led to Bjorn's death while his shield brother survived, clearly haunted this giant of a man. In the wagon, Freya whimpered softly in her sleep, and both adults instinctively moved toward her. Their eyes met over the child's peaceful face, and Astrid saw something in Stenvar's expression that gave her pause genuine care, not just for the sick daughter of a dead friend, but for this specific child who had stolen his heart with her brave smiles and whispered thanks. "The promise stands," Astrid said quietly, her anger replaced by a complex mixture of emotions she couldn't yet untangle. "When we reach Millhaven and Freya is well, I'll marry you. But I want the truth, Stenvar. All of it. What really happened to my husband, and why you feel you owe his memory such a debt." Stenvar nodded slowly. "When the child is stronger and the journey is done, you shall have your answers." As they settled down for the night, Astrid fingered Bjorn's axe where it lay beside their mysterious protector, wondering what other secrets this giant carried and whether she truly wanted to learn them all. The third day dawned clear and bright, with Freya sitting up in the wagon for the first time since their journey began. Her fever had broken completely during the night, leaving her pale but alert. The transformation was so dramatic that Astrid found herself stealing glances at Stenvar, wondering what other skills this mysterious giant possessed. "Mama, look!" Freya held up the wooden horse Stenvar had carved for her, running her small fingers over its smooth surface. One of its legs was cracked, but Uncle Stenvar fixed it. Astrid noticed how naturally her daughter had begun calling their rescuer Uncle, a title that spoke of trust and affection. When had that happened? And why did Stenvar accept it with such gentle grace, as if the role suited him perfectly? "He's quite skilled with his hands," Astrid observed, settling beside Freya to examine the toy. The repair was nearly invisible, reinforced with careful carving that transformed a flaw into an elegant detail. "Where did you learn such fine woodworking?" she asked Stenvar. He continued pulling the wagon with his steady rhythm, speaking over his shoulder. "My father was a shipwright. I have spent my youth learning to shape wood with precision, a skill that proves useful in many situations." Another piece of the puzzle that was Stenvar. A shipwright's son suggested coastal origins, perhaps even prosperity. Shipbuilders were respected craftsmen, not common laborers. It also explained his massive build, years of lifting heavy timber and wielding large tools. "Did you build ships too, before the wars?" Freya asked, with a child's innocent curiosity. "I helped repair them mostly," Stenvar replied, "but yes, I worked with wood and rope and sail. The sea teaches patience and respect for careful craftsmanship." Astrid found herself studying his hands as he adjusted the harness straps. They were indeed the hands of a craftsman, large and powerful, but with the dexterity that came from detailed work. How many hidden depths did this man possess? As they crested a low hill, the landscape began to change. The barren highlands gave way to rolling terrain dotted with hardy wildflowers and scrub pine. In the distance, wisps of smoke suggested human habitation. "We're making good time," Stenvar announced. "We should reach Millhaven by tomorrow evening." The news should have filled Astrid with relief, but instead she felt a strange reluctance. Once they reached the town, once Freya was pronounced healthy by the healer, the terms of their bargain would come due. She would become this stranger's wife, bound to a man she barely knew. During their midday rest beside a gurgling creek, Stenvar surprised her again. From his travel pack, he produced a collection of dried berries, nuts, and what appeared to be specially prepared jerky. The food was far superior to their simple travel rations, flavorful, nourishing, and clearly prepared by someone with extensive knowledge of preservation techniques. "This is wonderful," Astrid said, watching Freya eat with the first real appetite she'd shown in days. "Did you prepare this yourself?" "Necessity teaches many skills," Stenvar said simply, but Astrid caught the hint of pride in his voice. "Long journeys require proper provisioning. You travel often, then?" A shadow crossed his features. "More than I would prefer, but circumstances have made it necessary." Freya had finished eating and now sat at the creek's edge, dipping her toes in the cool water. The wooden horse rested beside her, and she spoke to it in the serious way children addressed beloved toys. "Tell me about my papa," she said suddenly, looking up at Stenvar with eyes that held Bjorn's own directness. "Mama says he was brave, but she gets sad when we talk about him too much. You knew him. What was he like as a warrior?" Astrid tensed, wondering how Stenvar would handle such an innocent yet loaded question. The answer would reveal much about both men. Stenvar settled himself on a fallen log, his expression thoughtful. "Your father was the kind of warrior who made other men feel safer just by standing near them. Not because he was the fiercest fighter, though he was skilled with that axe, but because he was utterly reliable. When Bjorn gave his word, it was as solid as mountain stone." Freya listened with rapt attention. "Did you fight battles together?" "We did. And in every one, your father's first concern was protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. He spoke of you and your mother constantly. His greatest pride wasn't his battle prowess, but his family waiting at home." Astrid felt tears prick her eyes. This was how Bjorn should be remembered, not just as a fallen warrior, but as a devoted father and husband. Stenvar's words painted a picture that honored both the man and his memory. "He used to braid my hair every morning," Freya said softly. "He said it was practice for when he had to braid rope on the farm." "That sounds exactly like something Bjorn would say," Stenvar replied with a warm chuckle. He had a gift for making everyday tasks feel like adventures. As the afternoon wore on, Astrid found herself watching the interaction between her daughter and this gentle giant. Freya had lost her father at such a young age that her memories were precious but fragmented. Stenvar's stories were filling in those gaps, giving her a fuller picture of the man Bjorn had been. But with each tale, each shared memory, Astrid's questions multiplied. How could Bjorn have shared so much about his family with a man he'd apparently never mentioned to that same family? What kind of friendship had they shared that was deep enough for such intimate conversation, yet somehow secret? When they resumed their journey, Freya rode beside Stenvar, chattering happily about everything from wildflowers to cloud shapes. The change in her was remarkable, from a desperately sick child to a vibrant little girl, full of curiosity about the world around her. "You're good with her," Astrid observed, walking on the wagon's other side. "Children are honest creatures," Stenvar replied. "They respond to sincerity more readily than adults do. Is that what this is?" The question slipped out before Astrid could stop it. "Sincerity? This marriage bargain, this mysterious connection to my husband, is it all genuine? Or am I being manipulated by a clever man with his own agenda?" Stenvar stopped walking, bringing their small procession to a halt. He turned to face her directly, his pale eyes serious. "Ask me anything you wish, Astrid. I will answer truthfully." The offer was simple, but Astrid found herself hesitating. Did she really want all the answers? Some truths, once learned, could never be unknown. "Not yet," she said finally. "When we reach Millhaven and honor our bargain, then I'll ask my questions, and you'll answer them all." "All of them," Stenvar agreed solemnly. As they resumed walking, Freya began singing an old lullaby that Bjorn used to hum while working in the fields. Her clear, sweet voice carried across the rolling hills, and Astrid noticed that Stenvar seemed to know the melody, his deep voice quietly joining in harmony. Another mystery, another connection to a past she thought she'd understood completely. The wooden horse bounced gently in Freya's lap as the wagon rolled toward their uncertain future. A small, perfect thing made whole again by careful hands and patient skill. Astrid wondered if the same hands might somehow mend the broken pieces of their lives with equal grace. The attack came at twilight, when the light played tricks with shadows and the rolling hills could hide an approaching threat until it was nearly too late. They had made camp in a sheltered grove beside a trickling stream, thinking themselves safe for the night. Freya was playing with her wooden horse while Astrid prepared their evening meal over Stenvar's carefully banked fire. The first warning was the sudden silence. Birds that had been chattering in the trees fell quiet all at once, as if some predator had entered their domain. Stenvar's head snapped up from where he'd been checking the wagon's wheels, his pale eyes scanning the gathering darkness with the alertness of a man who'd learned to trust his instincts. "Into the wagon," he said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. "Both of you. Now." Astrid opened her mouth to ask why, but the low growl that echoed from the hillside above answered her question. More growls joined the first, creating a chorus that made her blood run cold. Wolves, a pack of them, and by the sound, they were hungry. Freya scrambled into the wagon without question, clutching her wooden horse. Astrid was right behind her, pulling blankets over them both while peering through a gap in the canvas cover. What she saw made her heart hammer against her ribs. At least 6 wolves had emerged from the undergrowth, their yellow eyes reflecting the dying firelight. They moved with the coordinated precision of experienced hunters, spreading out to surround the camp. These weren't the half-starved scavengers that occasionally bothered farms. These were massive creatures, well-fed and confident. Stenvar stood beside the fire, Bjorn's battle-axe now in his hands. The weapon seemed to belong there, as natural as breathing. He'd shed his earlier gentleness like a discarded cloak, and in its place stood something far more dangerous, a warrior in his element. The largest wolf, a grey-black male with scars marking his muzzle, padded forward with deliberate menace. It was testing Stenvar, trying to determine if this lone human represented easy prey or genuine threat. "Easy, old father," Stenvar spoke to the beast in a low, steady voice. "We're just passing through your territory. No need for anyone to be injured tonight." The wolf's response was a snarl that revealed teeth like ivory daggers. It crouched, muscles bunching for a spring that would carry it straight at Stenvar's throat. What happened next unfolded with such swift precision that Astrid barely had time to process it. The wolf launched itself through the air, a blur of fur and fangs. Stenvar stepped aside with fluid grace, the axe blade describing a perfect arc that caught the creature mid-leap. The impact sent it tumbling into the darkness, yelping in pain but still alive. The other wolves attacked as one, flowing toward their prey like a grey tide. But Stenvar moved like a force of nature, not wild or uncontrolled, but with the devastating efficiency of a man who'd fought countless battles and learned to waste no motion. The axe became an extension of his will, keeping the snapping jaws at bay, while his free hand wielded a heavy knife that appeared as if by magic. One wolf went down with a broken leg. Another retreated with a gash across its shoulder. The injured pack leader limped in circles, no longer eager to press the attack. Within moments, what had seemed like certain disaster became a rout as the surviving wolves melted back into the darkness, carrying their wounded with them. Stenvar stood in the firelight, not even breathing hard. A thin line of blood marked his forearm, where one set of claws had found their mark, but otherwise he appeared untouched. The transformation from gentle giant to lethal warrior and back again was so complete that Astrid wondered if she'd imagined the entire episode. "Are they gone?" Freya whispered from beneath the blankets. "They're gone, little one," Stenvar replied, his voice once again soft and reassuring. "They won't be back tonight." As he cleaned the axe blade with methodical care, Astrid climbed down from the wagon on unsteady legs. She'd seen Bjorn practice with his weapons, had watched him spar with other warriors, but she'd never witnessed such devastating skill in actual combat. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Stenvar looked up from his weapon maintenance, and for a moment she caught a glimpse of something ancient in his pale eyes. Years of violence, of battles fought and friends lost. "The same place your husband learned," he said simply. "In the king's wars, where skill meant survival and hesitation meant death. But you moved like you were dancing with those wolves, as if you knew exactly what they would do before they did it." A shadow of a smile crossed his weathered features. "Experience teaches many lessons. I've faced worse things than hungry wolves in darker places than this peaceful grove." Later, as they settled down for the night, Astrid found herself studying the leather journal that Stenvar had pulled from his pack. He wrote in it by firelight, his massive hands surprisingly delicate as they guided a piece of charcoal across the pages. When he noticed her watching, he didn't close the book or turn away. "What are you writing?" she asked. "Notes about our journey, thoughts about the day, old habits from years of travel." He held up a page covered with careful script. "Would you like to see?" Astrid moved closer, and what she saw astonished her. The pages weren't filled with crude battle reports or simple travel logs. Instead, she found detailed observations about the changing landscape, pressed flowers from their journey, and even a small sketch of Freya sleeping peacefully in the wagon. "You drew this?" She pointed to the sketch, which captured her daughter's peaceful expression with remarkable skill. "I find that drawing helps me remember important moments," Stenvar said quietly. "Your daughter's recovery from illness, that's something worth preserving." Astrid turned more pages, discovering poetry written in several languages, maps marked with careful notations, and what appeared to be medical observations about various plants and their uses. This wasn't the journal of a simple warrior, this was the work of a scholar, an artist, a man of unexpected depth and sensitivity. "You're not what you seem," she said, looking up to meet his pale eyes. "Few people are," he replied. "The question is whether what lies beneath the surface is better or worse than what shows on the outside." In the dying firelight, surrounded by the lingering scent of danger and the soft sounds of Freya's peaceful sleep, Astrid found herself wondering if this mysterious giant might be far more complex and far more worthy than she'd initially imagined. The stone cairns appeared on the morning of their final day's journey to Millhaven, rising from the hillside like ancient guardians, keeping watch over the dead. Each carefully stacked pile of rocks marked a fallen warrior, and by their number dozens scattered across the slope, this had been the site of a significant battle. Stenvar stopped so suddenly that the wagon's traces went slack. His face had gone pale beneath his weathered tan, and his hands trembled slightly as he set down the harness. "What is this place?" Astrid asked, though something in her chest already knew the answer. The way Stenvar stared at those cairns, the sudden rigidity in his shoulders, the careful blankness that had settled over his features, all spoke of personal grief. "Raven's Field," he said quietly. "This is where your husband died." The name hit Astrid like a physical blow. She'd heard it before, whispered by the veteran who'd brought news of Bjorn's death. "A great victory," he'd said. "The enemy routed, their advance broken." But victories, she was learning, looked different to those who'd paid their price in blood and loss. Freya stirred in the wagon, sensing the sudden tension. "Mama? Why did we stop?" "Just resting, sweetheart." Astrid managed, though her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "Uncle Stenvar needs to check something." Without another word, Stenvar began walking up the slope toward the cairns. His movements were stiff, almost mechanical, as if each step required conscious effort. Astrid hesitated for a moment, then followed, leaving Freya safely in the wagon with strict instructions. Not to wander. The battlefield had been well tended by those who survived. Each cairn was precisely built, and many bore personal markers: a warrior's knife, a piece of carved bone, a sprig of evergreen that someone had placed in recent memory. Stenvar moved among them with the careful reverence of a man visiting a sacred place. He stopped before one cairn that looked no different from the others to Astrid's eyes. But when he knelt beside it, she saw him place Bjorn's battle axe against the stones with infinite care. "This is where he fell," Stenvar said, his deep voice rough with emotion. "He was covering the retreat of wounded men when the enemy cavalry broke through our line. I was supposed to be beside him." Supposed to be? Astrid knelt next to him, staring at the simple pile of stones that marked her husband's final resting place. "I was his shield brother. When warriors fight together long enough, they learn to move as one person. His left side, my right. His weakness covered by my strength, mine by his." Stenvar's pale eyes were fixed on the cairn, but Astrid sensed he was seeing something else entirely, the battle that had claimed so many lives. "But I wasn't there when he needed me most. Why not?" The question came out sharper than she'd intended, but she needed to understand. Stenvar was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his words came slowly, as if each one caused him pain. "I was pursuing enemy archers who'd taken position in those rocks." He pointed to a distant outcropping. "They were cutting down our men with impunity. Someone had to stop them, and I was the best tracker we had. I believed that eliminating that threat was worth the risk of leaving Bjorn's flank exposed for a few minutes. And I was successful. I killed the archers and probably saved a dozen lives. But while I was gone, the cavalry charge came from an unexpected direction. Bjorn faced them alone when he should have had his shield brother beside him." Astrid stared at the stones, trying to imagine that terrible moment. Bjorn, her gentle giant of a husband, standing alone against mounted warriors while his closest friend fought distant enemies. "He held them off long enough for the wounded to escape," Stenvar continued. "By the time I returned, he was down, but every man he'd been protecting survived because of his sacrifice. The battle was won, but you lost your closest friend while serving the greater good." Astrid finished softly. "I made a tactical decision that saved many lives at the cost of one life that mattered more to me than all the others combined." Stenvar's voice broke slightly. "I've questioned that choice every day since." For a long moment, they knelt together in silence beside Bjorn's grave. The morning sun warmed the stones, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers that had grown up around the battlefield. Life, returning to a place of death, nature's way of healing old wounds. "He wouldn't want you to carry this guilt," Astrid said finally. "Bjorn believed in duty above personal preference. If saving those wounded men required you to be elsewhere, he would have understood. Understanding and forgiving are different things." "Yes, they are." Astrid reached out and placed her hand over Stenvar's where it rested on the stones. But Bjorn was capable of both. Stenvar turned to look at her, and she saw tears tracking down his weathered cheeks. "I promised him as he died that I would watch over his family. That promise, it's all I have left of our friendship. Is that why you want to marry me? Penance for surviving when he didn't?" "I thought so," Stenvar admitted. "When I found you in danger, it seemed like fate offering me a chance to balance the scales. But now, he gestured toward the wagon where Frasier was humming softly to herself, playing with her wooden horse. "Now I begin to think there might be other reasons. Watching your daughter smile, seeing your strength in the face of hardship, sharing quiet moments by the fire. These things weren't part of any promise I made to a dying man." Astrid felt something shift in her chest, a subtle loosening of the tight control she'd maintained over her emotions since Bjorn's death. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that what began as duty might be growing into something else entirely." Stenvar's pale eyes met hers with startling intensity. "And that terrifies me more than any battle I've ever fought. A child's laughter drifted up from the wagon as Freya discovered something amusing in her play. The sound seemed to break the spell of grief that had settled over the hillside, reminding them both that life continued beyond the reach of old sorrows. "We should go," Astrid said gently. "Millhaven isn't far now, and we have a promise to keep." As they walked back down the slope, leaving Bjorn's axe beside his cairn as a final offering, Astrid found herself wondering if the promise they'd made was changing into something neither of them had expected, and whether that might be exactly what they both needed. They were within sight of Millhaven's watchtowers when Freya's fever returned with a vengeance. The relapse struck with frightening speed. One moment she was chattering happily about the approaching town. The next she was burning with heat and struggling to breathe in sharp, painful gasps. "It's worse than before," Astrid said, her voice tight with panic as she felt her daughter's blazing forehead. "How is that possible?" She was getting better. Stenvar's face had gone grim. He lifted Freyja from the wagon with infinite care, his massive hands gentle as he examined her flushed face and listened to her labored breathing. "The mountain fever," he said quietly. "Sometimes it returns stronger after seeming to break. The child's body is fighting a battle it may not have the strength to win." The words hit Astrid like hammer blows. After everything they'd endured, after coming so close to safety, was she going to lose her daughter within sight of help? "What do we do?" she whispered. "There's a plant that grows in the high peaks, mountain sage with silver leaves. It's the only thing that can truly break this fever, but it's dangerous to harvest. The plants grow on cliff faces where one wrong step means death." Astrid stared at him, understanding dawning. "You're going to leave us here and climb alone? I can reach the plants and be back before nightfall. The town's healer can tend Freya while I'm gone, but without the mountain sage, her remedies will only provide comfort, not cure." The thought of being separated from Stenvar now, when Freya's life hung in the balance, filled Astrid with unexpected dread. Over the past few days she'd grown accustomed to his steady presence, his quiet competence in the face of crisis. The idea of facing this alone seemed unbearable. "Take me with you," she said impulsively. Stenvar shook his head firmly. "The climb is treacherous. You're needed here, with your daughter. And if you fall from those cliffs, if you don't return, what then?" Something flickered in Stenvar's pale eyes, surprise, perhaps, at the genuine concern in her voice. "You would mourn my loss?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither was quite ready to examine. Astrid realized with sudden clarity that yes, she would mourn him. Somewhere during their journey, this mysterious giant had become more than just a protector or the fulfillment of an old promise. He'd become important to her in ways she was only beginning to understand. "Yes," she said simply. "I would." The admission seemed to give Stenvar pause. He studied her face for a long moment, as if searching for something he wasn't sure he'd find. "Then, I will be very careful," he said finally, "and I will return." They reached Millhaven as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the market square. The town was larger than Astrid had expected, with stone buildings and bustling streets that spoke of prosperity and trade. People stopped to stare at the unlikely sight of a giant pulling a wagon while a woman walked anxiously beside him. The healer's house was easy to find, a neat building near the town centre, marked with bundles of dried herbs hanging from the eaves. The woman who answered their knock was perhaps 60 years old, with silver-streaked hair and the calm competence that came from a lifetime of dealing with illness and injury. "I'm Grandmother Solveig," she said, taking in their situation with quick, experienced eyes. "Bring the child inside." The healer's home was a sanctuary of cleanliness and order. Shelves lined the walls, filled with carefully labeled jars and bundles of medicinal plants. The air smelled of lavender and sage, creating an atmosphere of peace that helped calm Astrid's frayed nerves. Solveig examined Freya with gentle thoroughness, her weathered hands checking pulse points and listening to the child's breathing with practiced skill. "Mountain fever," she confirmed. "The child is strong, but this strain is particularly virulent. I can ease her breathing and make her more comfortable, but for a true cure— Mountain sage, Stenvar finished. I know where to find it. The healer's eyebrows rose. You're familiar with the plant? And willing to make that climb? Both, Stenvar replied simply. Then you're either very brave or very foolish. The silver sage grows on the Devil's Teeth cliffs that have claimed more than one desperate parent over the years. I'm neither parent nor desperate, Stenvar said quietly, but I am determined. As he prepared to leave, gathering rope and climbing tools from his seemingly inexhaustible pack, Astrid found herself studying this man who was about to risk his life for her daughter. The afternoon light streaming through the healer's window caught the silver threads in his wheat-colored hair, and she noticed fine lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting against sun and wind. Why? She asked softly, when they had a moment alone. Why risk everything for a child who isn't yours, for a woman you barely know? Stenvar's hands stilled on the coils of rope. Because she matters to you. And you. He paused, as if the words were difficult to find. You matter to me. The simple statement carried a weight that took Astrid's breath away. Not the formal duty of a promise to a dead friend, but something personal and immediate and real. Stenvar, she began, not sure what she wanted to say. When I return, he said, rising to his full height, when Frasier is well again and we've honored our bargain, I want you to know that whatever happens between us, marriage or parting this journey, has given me something I thought I'd lost forever. What? Hope. He touched her cheek briefly, his massive hand surprisingly gentle. The possibility that a man carrying such guilt might still deserve happiness. Then he was gone, striding out into the afternoon sunlight with his rope and determination. Astrid watched from the window as his tall figure disappeared up the mountain path, carrying her heart along with her hopes for Freya's recovery. In her small bed, surrounded by Grandmother Solveig's healing herbs, Freya stirred restlessly and whispered, "Papa." But which father she was calling for, the one who died on a distant battlefield, or the one now climbing treacherous cliffs to save her life, Astrid couldn't say. Stenvar returned as the sun touched the western mountains, his hands scraped and bloodied from the treacherous climb, but triumphant. The mountain sage he'd harvested glowed silver-green in the fading light, its distinctive leaves still damp with mountain mist. Grandmother Solveig took the precious herbs with reverent care, immediately beginning the delicate process of preparing the curative draught. This will take some time, the healer warned as she ground the leaves in her mortar. The preparation must be precise, or the medicine becomes poison. Rest while I work. But Stenvar couldn't rest. He paced the small confines of the healer's main room like a caged wolf, his pale eyes constantly drifting to the closed door, behind which Freya fought her battle with the fever. The careful control he'd maintained throughout their journey seemed to be fraying at the edges. "You're exhausted," Astrid observed. "When did you last sleep properly?" "Sleep can wait," he replied curtly, then seemed to catch himself. "Forgive me." The climb was challenging. Astrid studied his profile in the firelight. There was something different about him since his return, a tension that went beyond physical fatigue. During the dangerous climb, something had changed, and she sensed it was more than just the successful harvest of healing herbs. "What happened up there?" she asked quietly. Stenvar stopped pacing. For a long moment he stared into the dancing flames, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made her lean closer. "I had time to think during the climb, too much time." He reached into his travel pack and withdrew something wrapped in oiled leather. "And I realized there was something I should have given you long before now." He unwrapped the package with careful hands, revealing a piece of parchment that had been folded and refolded so many times the creases had worn soft as cloth. The writing on it was faded, but still legible, and Astrid recognized Bjorn's bold script immediately. "What is this?" she whispered, though her heart already knew. Your husband's final letter, Stenvar said quietly. He wrote it the night before the battle at Ravensfield. Asked me to deliver it, if the worst happened. Astrid's hands trembled as she took the parchment. You've carried this for 3 years? I couldn't bring myself to deliver it. Reading it felt like admitting he was truly gone. But tonight, watching you wait while I risked my life for your daughter, I realized that keeping it was another kind of cowardice. With shaking fingers, Astrid unfolded the letter. Bjorn's beloved handwriting filled the page, and she could almost hear his voice speaking the words, Asterisk. My dearest Astrid, Asterisk, Asterisk. If you are reading this, then the gods have called me to their halls, and I have failed in my promise to return to you and our sweet Freya. Know that my last thoughts were of your smile, and the sound of our daughter's laughter echoing through our home. Asterisk, asterisk, I have spoken much with my shield brother Stenvar about you both. He knows of your strength, your fierce love for our child, your stubborn independence that I cherish even when it drives me to distraction. I have asked him to watch over you if I cannot return, though I know you will resist such help with your usual spirit. Asterisk, asterisk, Astrid, my love, if the time comes when you must, choose between pride and protection, choose protection. If the choice lies between loneliness and companionship, choose companionship. You have mourned me long enough, live again. Love again. Asterisk, asterisk. Stenvar is a good man, though he carries burdens that make him believe otherwise. He speaks of you both with such tenderness that I sometimes think the gods meant him for our family all along. If he offers you his protection, his devotion, even his name, do not refuse out of loyalty to my memory. Grant him what I cannot give the chance to build something beautiful from the ashes of old sorrow. Asterisk, asterisk. Kiss our daughter and tell her Papa loves her beyond the reach of death. And know that wherever the gods send my spirit, I will be watching over you both with joy, not jealousy, should you find happiness with another. Asterisk, asterisk. All my love, always. Bjorn Time's tears blurred Astrid's vision as she read the final lines. Her husband, practical, loving Bjorn, had orchestrated this from beyond the grave. The marriage proposal, the protection, even Stenvar's knowledge of their family, it had all been planned. He arranged this, she whispered. All of it. You finding us, the bargain, even the marriage proposal was his idea, Stenvar confirmed, his voice rough. He made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would find you and offer you my protection. He said you'd be too proud to accept charity, but you might accept a bargain. Astrid stared at the letter, emotions warring in her chest. So this whole journey, everything between us, it was just you following orders from a dead man? It began that way, Stenvar said carefully. But you must know it hasn't remained so. How can I know anything? Astrid's voice rose with frustration and hurt. How can I trust any feeling you claim when it all started as an elaborate deception? Because, Stenvar said, moving closer, his pale eyes intense with desperate honesty, Bjorn asked me to protect you. He asked me to offer you security. But he never asked me to fall in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, raw and vulnerable. Astrid looked up to meet his gaze, seeing past the careful control to the man beneath a man who'd spent 3 years carrying guilt and obligation, only to find himself caught in emotions he'd never expected. You love me, she asked quietly. I love your strength when you face impossible choices. I love your gentleness with Freya, even when you're exhausted and afraid. I love the way you questioned everything about our bargain while still honoring it for your daughter's sake. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I love you, Astrid, not because Bjorn asked me to protect you, but because you've made me believe I might be worthy of something more than a life spent atoning for old failures. From the inner room came the sound of Grandmother Solveig's pestle working steadily, preparing the medicine that would cure Freya's fever. Soon their daughter would be well. Soon they would reach the moment where their bargain must be fulfilled. What happens now? Astrid asked, clutching Bjorn's letter. Do we honor the promise, my promise to marry you when Freya is healed? Or do we acknowledge that it was built on deception and obligation? Stenvar was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his words carried a humility that made her heart ache. I want to ask you to marry me again. Not because of any promise to Bjorn, not because of any bargain struck in desperation. I want to ask you as Stenvar, a man who has found something precious he thought lost forever. A man who would spend the rest of his life protecting and cherishing you and Freya, not from duty, but from love. And if I say no? Astrid asked softly. If I choose to honor my husband's wishes but not your feelings, then I will accept your decision and withdraw from your life, as painful as that might be. You'll never lack for anything, I'll see to that, but I won't burden you with unwanted affections. Astrid folded the letter carefully, her mind spinning with the weight of choice. Tomorrow, Freya would be well. Tomorrow, she would have to decide not just whether to honor a bargain struck in desperation, but whether to trust her own growing feelings for this complex, gentle, honorable man who'd carried her husband's final gift through 3 years of self-imposed exile. In the distance, church bells rang the hour, marking the passage of time toward a future she could no longer predict. By dawn, Frasia's fever had broken completely. Grandmother Solveig's mountain sage draught had worked its ancient magic through the night, and the child awoke clear-eyed and hungry for the first time in days. Her recovery was so complete that she sat up in bed demanding breakfast and asking when they could explore the fascinating town beyond the healer's windows. Look, Mama, she called out, holding up her wooden horse. Uncle Stenvar carved more details while I was sleeping. Indeed, the simple toy had been transformed during the night hours. Delicate new markings adorned the horse's flanks, tiny flowers and intricate knotwork that must have taken hours of patient carving. Stenvar must have worked by candlelight while keeping vigil over the sick child, his massive hands creating beauty in the quiet darkness. It's lovely, sweetheart, Astrid said, but her eyes were on Stenvar, who stood by the window, watching the morning activity in Millhaven's market square. He'd been awake all night, she knew, but he showed no signs of fatigue. Instead, he radiated a tension that spoke of momentous decisions approaching. Uncle Stenvar, Freya called, will you show me how to carve horses like this someday? He turned from the window, and Astrid saw something flicker across his weathered features, hope warring with uncertainty. Perhaps, little one, if your mother agrees to let me stay in your lives long enough to teach you. The statement hung in the morning air, gentle but pointed. The time for decisions had arrived. Frasier was well. They'd reached Millhaven safely, and the terms of their original bargain had been fulfilled. Now came the moment Astrid had been simultaneously dreading and anticipating since that first desperate day in the Highlands. Grandmother Solveig emerged from her herb room, wiping her hands on a clean cloth. The child is completely recovered, she announced with professional satisfaction. Whatever fever she carried is gone, and her strength is returning rapidly. She'll need good food and gentle activity for a few days, but the danger has passed. Thank you, Astrid said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. We're forever in your debt. No debt, the healer replied kindly. Healing children is why the gods gave me these skills. But now you must decide what comes next. Will you be staying in Millhaven? The question brought their situation into sharp focus. They couldn't remain in the healer's house indefinitely, and Astrid realized she'd given no thought to practical matters beyond Frasier's recovery. Where would they go? What would they do? How would their new reality take shape? There's an inn near the market square, Stenvar said quietly. Clean rooms, good food. You could stay there while we decide on the future. His careful phrasing didn't go unnoticed. He was offering her space to think, time to choose, without pressure or assumptions. The consideration in that gesture touched her more deeply than any passionate declaration might have. They gathered their belongings in thoughtful silence, Freya chattering happily about everything she wanted to see in the bustling town. As they prepared to leave the healer's sanctuary, Astrid realized this short journey across Millhaven would be the most important walk of her life. The town bell tower rose above the buildings ahead of them, its bronze bell visible through the morning mist. For some reason, the sight of it made Astrid's heart race. Perhaps because it represented the crossroads where her old life and potential new life intersected. Every step toward that tower brought her closer to a choice that would define not just her future, but Freya's and Stenvar's as well. "Mama," Freya said, skipping between the adults as they walked, "are you and Uncle Stenvar going to get married?" Astrid nearly stumbled over her own feet. "What makes you ask that?" "Because he looks at you the way Papa used to look at you. And you look at him the way you looked at Papa when you thought I wasn't watching." Freya's innocent observation carried the devastating accuracy that only children possess. "And because it would make me happy to have a Papa again." Stenvar stopped walking entirely. When Astrid looked at him, she saw a man struggling with emotions too large for words. The careful control he'd maintained throughout their journey was cracking, revealing the vulnerable heart beneath. "Would it truly make you happy?" he asked Freya softly. "Even though I could never replace your real father?" "You wouldn't be replacing him," Freya said with the simple wisdom of childhood. "You'd just be adding to our family. Papa is still in here." She touched her chest over her heart. "But there's room for you too." They reached the market square as the morning bustle reached its peak. Merchants called their wares, children played between the stalls, and the sounds of normal life surrounded them. Here, among ordinary people living ordinary lives, the magnitude of their choice felt both overwhelming and strangely comforting. The inn Stenvar had mentioned stood on the square's far side, its wooden sign depicting a golden sheaf of wheat. The Bell Tower Inn, how fitting that it should be named for the landmark that had drawn Astrid's attention. She found herself staring up at that bell tower, thinking of all the moments in life when bells rang to mark significant events. Births, deaths, weddings, victories, defeats. "I need to ask you something," Stenvar said quietly as they paused in the shadow of the tower. "And I need you to answer honestly, without consideration for my feelings or our bargain or anything except your own truth." Astrid nodded, though her throat felt tight. "If we had met under different circumstances, if there had been no broken wagon, no sick child, no desperate bargain, do you think you could have come to care for me? Not from gratitude or obligation, but as a woman cares for a man she finds worthy of her heart." The question cut to the core of everything she'd been struggling with. Strip away the dramatic circumstances, the life or death situations, the weight of promises and guilt and duty. What remained? "I think," she said slowly, "that I would have been drawn to your gentleness with children. I would have admired your knowledge of healing and your skill with your hands. I would have been curious about the poetry in your journal and the careful way you observe the world around you." She paused, watching hope kindle in his pale eyes. "I think I would have been impressed by your courage and your loyalty to old friends. I think I would have found myself wondering what thoughts lay behind your quiet moments and what dreams you carried in your heart." "And now?" he asked softly. "Knowing what you know, having traveled this strange path with me, what do you think now?" Before Astrid could answer, Freya tugged on her sleeve. "Mama, look. There are people gathering around the church steps. And see, the priest is there in his fancy robes. Someone must be getting married." Indeed, a small crowd had assembled near the town church. A young couple stood before the priest, surrounded by family and friends. The bride wore flowers in her hair and a dress of blue wool, while the groom looked nervous but radiant. The sight of their joy, their choice freely made, struck Astrid like a revelation. "They look happy," she murmured, watching as the couple exchanged vows. "Yes," Stenvar agreed. "They do. As the wedding party celebrated, Astrid felt the weight of her own choice settling on her shoulders. Tomorrow, or the next day, she would have to give Stenvar his answer. She would have to decide whether their connection was real enough, strong enough, to build a life upon. The bell in the tower began to chime, marking the noon hour. 12 clear notes rang across the market square, and with each one, Astrid felt pieces of her old life falling away, making room for something new and uncertain and possibly wonderful. But first, she needed time to think. Time to separate her genuine feelings from her gratitude, her attraction from her obligation. Time to decide if she was ready to trust her heart to this gentle giant who'd carried so much guilt and love in equal measure. The last bell note faded into the busy sounds of the market, and they walked toward the inn where decisions would be made and futures would be chosen. The market square stone lay warm beneath Astrid's feet as she stood before the gathered crowd, her heart pounding against her ribs like a caged bird. Word had spread through Millhaven faster than she'd expected, the story of the mysterious giant who'd pulled a wagon for 3 days to save a dying child, and the bargain struck between desperate strangers. Now half the town had assembled in the square, drawn by curiosity and the promise of witnessing something extraordinary. Stenvar stood 10 paces away, near the ancient market stone where merchants had conducted business for generations. His massive frame was still as carved granite, but Astrid could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful blankness he'd assumed to mask his vulnerability. He'd given her the morning to think, had taken Freya to see the town's small menagerie, while Astrid wrestled with the most important decision of her life. Now, the moment had arrived. The bargain demanded fulfillment, and the townspeople expected a spectacle. What they would witness instead was something far more complex, the intersection of duty, choice, and the mysterious alchemy that transformed 2 wounded souls into something greater than the sum of their individual sorrows. Father Mikael, the town priest, stood ready to perform whatever ceremony the situation demanded. His weathered face showed kind patience, though Astrid suspected he'd never dealt with quite this combination of circumstances before. A marriage bargain struck in desperation, now to be honored or dissolved before witnesses who understood nothing of the journey that had brought them to this moment. Freya sat on the edge of the stone fountain, clutching her wooden horse and watching the proceedings with the solemn attention children reserved for momentous occasions. She'd asked no questions when Astrid explained they needed to honor their promise to Uncle Stenvar, but her dark eyes, so like Bjorn's, held a wisdom that made Astrid's chest tight with emotion. "Lady Astrid," Father Mikael's voice carried clearly across the square, "you stand before God and this community to fulfill a vow made in desperate circumstances. Do you come here freely or under compulsion?" The question struck to the heart of everything. Did she stand here freely? The bargain had been struck when Freya lay dying, when desperation left no real choice. But that desperation was gone now. Her daughter was healthy, they were safe in a prosperous town, and she faced this moment with clear eyes and an uncoerced heart. "I come freely, Father," she said, her voice carrying further than she'd intended. "And you, Stenvar of the northern reaches," the priest continued, "do you also stand here of your own will, or does duty alone compel you?" Stenvar's pale eyes found hers across the square. In them she saw the weight of 3 years' guilt, the careful hope he'd been nurturing, and something deeper, a love that had grown from the seeds of obligation into something entirely its own. "I stand here freely," he replied, his deep voice steady despite the emotion Astrid could read in his face. "Whatever began this bargain, I am here now by choice." The crowd murmured approvingly. They'd come expecting drama, perhaps a reluctant widow forced into unwanted marriage, or a mercenary giant claiming his due. Instead, they were witnessing something that looked surprisingly like the beginning of a genuine love story. But Astrid wasn't finished. The words she'd rehearsed all morning demanded voice, and the market square, this place where honest dealings were expected and binding agreements made, seemed the perfect venue for her declaration. "Before we proceed," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs, "I need to say something." The crowd fell silent. Even the children stopped their play to listen. 3 days ago, when I made this bargain, I was a desperate mother watching her child die. I agreed to marriage because I had no choice. It was that, or lose my daughter. I expected to honor a transaction, nothing more. She took a step toward Stenvar, then another, closing the distance between them with measured deliberation. But during our journey, I discovered that the man I'd bound myself to was nothing like what I'd imagined. He wasn't a lonely giant seeking a convenient wife or a mercenary demanding payment for services. He is a man of honor, gentleness, and hidden depths that I'm only beginning to understand. Another step brought her within arm's reach of Stenvar. She could see the barely controlled hope in his eyes, the way his massive hands trembled slightly at his sides. I learned that he carries poetry in his travel pack and carves toys for sick children. I learned that he faces wolves without flinching, but tends fevered brows with infinite patience. I learned that he's been carrying guilt for my husband's death for 3 years, trying to honor a promise that was rooted in love, not obligation. The square was so quiet now that the sound of water trickling in the fountain seemed loud as thunder. "So yes, I honor our bargain," Astrid continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "But not because I must, because I choose to. Not as payment for services rendered, but as recognition of something precious that grew between us when neither of us was looking." She reached out and took Stenvar's hands in hers, marveling again at their size and gentleness. "The question now, before God and these witnesses, is whether you'll have me not as the fulfillment of an old promise, but as a woman who's come to love you freely." Stenvar's response came not in words but in action that surprised everyone, including Astrid herself. The giant of a man who had faced wolves and treacherous cliffs without hesitation dropped to one knee before her in the market square, his pale eyes bright with unshed tears. From his pack he withdrew something wrapped in soft leather, not the crude token one might expect from a warrior's hasty proposal, but a ring of simple iron, polished to a warm glow and engraved with intricate knotwork that matched the carvings on Freya's wooden horse. "I made this during the nights when I kept watch over your daughter," he said, his deep voice carrying clearly across the hushed square. "Not because our bargain demanded it, but because the thought of offering you something worthy of your worth consumed my thoughts." He held up the ring, and Astrid could see that the metalwork was exquisite, not the crude hammering of a battlefield smith, but the careful artistry of someone who understood that love deserved beauty. "Astrid, daughter of the Highlands, widow of Bjorn the Steadfast, mother of brave little Freya," he continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I do not ask you to marry me because of any bargain struck in desperation. I ask because you have shown me that a man can carry both guilt and hope in his heart, that redemption comes not through penance, but through choosing to love again." A collective sigh rose from the watching crowd. This was far removed from the practical transaction they'd expected to witness. This was a declaration of love that would be retold in taverns and around hearth fires for years to come. "I ask because your strength in the face of hardship humbles me," Stenvar continued, "because your devotion to your daughter shows me what it means to love without reservation, because in 3 short days you have transformed me from a man haunted by his failures into someone who dares to dream of building something beautiful." Astrid felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she looked down at this powerful man kneeling before her, offering not just his protection or his duty, but his whole heart. "I cannot promise you wealth. I am a wandering man with simple means. I cannot promise you ease. My past may bring complications to your peaceful life. But I can promise you this. Every day that I draw breath, you and Freya will be cherished, protected, and loved beyond measure. You will be my heart's home, and she will be the daughter I never dared hope for." From her place by the fountain, Freya clapped her hands together, bouncing with excitement. "Say yes, Mama. Say yes to Uncle Stenvar." The child's joyful encouragement broke the spell that had held the square in breathless silence. Laughter rippled through the crowd, warm and approving. These practical people understood that love often grew from humble beginnings, and they were witnessing something genuine and rare. Astrid knelt beside Stenvar, bringing herself to his eye level. This close, she could see the vulnerability he'd hidden behind his warrior's composure, the hope he'd been afraid to acknowledge even to himself. "The ring is beautiful," she said softly, "but I would marry you if you offered me a blade of grass." The question was never about tokens or bargains, Stenvar. It was about whether I could trust my heart to someone again. She held out her left hand, where Bjorn's worn silver band still circled her finger. "My first marriage was built on young love and simple dreams. If I marry you, it will be with the wisdom that comes from loss, the strength that comes from surviving alone, and the courage that comes from choosing hope over fear." Stenvar reached for the silver ring, and Astrid felt a moment of panic, but instead of removing it, he gently moved it to her right hand, where it settled comfortably on her middle finger. "Your first love deserves honor," he said quietly. "Bjorn will always be Freya's father and your first husband. But there's room in a heart for more than one love, just as there's room on a hand for more than one ring." The iron band slipped onto her finger with perfect fit, its weight both foreign and comforting. Astrid stared at it for a moment, marveling at how right it felt, not replacing what had been, but adding to it. Father Mikael stepped forward, his face beaming with the joy that came from witnessing true love triumph over circumstance. "I think we have our answer then. Shall we proceed with the ceremony?" "Yes," Astrid and Stenvar said together, their voices joining in perfect harmony. As they rose to their feet, hands clasped and rings catching the afternoon sunlight, the crowd erupted in cheers. Freya ran to them, wrapping her arms around both their legs in an embrace that sealed their transformation from strangers bound by desperation into a family united by choice. The new wedding ring gleamed on Astrid's finger, simple iron that represented not a future built on obligation, but one forged from the strongest materials in the human heart: forgiveness, hope, and love freely given. 6 months later, the hearthstone of their new home radiated warmth against the coastal chill, its solid presence anchoring a life built from careful choices and patient love. Astrid knelt beside it, arranging the last of the autumn wildflowers she'd gathered that morning, their colors bright against the grey stone that Stenvar had laid with his own hands. The house they'd built together overlooked a sheltered bay, where fishing boats bobbed at anchor and merchant vessels brought goods from distant lands. It was modest but well-crafted, with wide windows that caught the morning light and a workshop where Stenvar had returned to his father's trade of shipbuilding. The sound of his hammer and plane drifted in from the shed behind the house, a steady rhythm that had become as comforting as a heartbeat. "Mama, come see," Freya called from the kitchen doorway, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Papa's teaching me to carve a ship, and I almost have all the rigging lines right." In the months since their wedding, the child had blossomed like a flower given proper soil and sunlight. Her health was robust, her laughter constant, and her attachment to Stenvar so natural that visitors often assumed he was her birth father. The wooden horse he'd carved during their journey now sat on the mantelpiece, carefully preserved as a reminder of where their family had begun. Astrid rose from her flower, arranging, and followed her daughter to the workshop. Through the open door, she could see Stenvar bent over his workbench, his massive hands guiding Freya's smaller ones as she worked her carving knife around a piece of pine. The sight never failed to fill her with quiet contentment, this gentle giant who'd learned to be a father through instinct and love. "See, Mama?" Freya held up her work proudly. "It's going to be a trading ship, like the ones that bring spices from the southern kingdoms. Papa says when I'm older, we might sail on one together." "It's beautiful work," Astrid said honestly. The carving showed real skill for a child her age, testament to Stenvar's patient teaching. You have your father's hands for detail. Both fathers, she thought, but didn't say. Freya had inherited Bjorn's steady concentration and Stenvar's growing artistic sensibility. The child was becoming uniquely herself while carrying the best of both men who'd loved her. Time to clean up, Stenvar said gently, ruffling Freya's hair. Grandmother Solveig will be here for supper soon, and your mama needs help with the preparations. The healer had become a frequent visitor, drawn as much by Freya's lively conversation as by genuine friendship with Astrid. She'd pronounced herself delighted with their new life, and often stayed overnight when her rounds brought her to the coastal villages. As Freya carefully put away her carving tools, Stenvar caught Astrid's hand and drew her outside to the small garden where they'd planted herbs and vegetables. The late afternoon light turned the bay to molten gold, and fishing boats were returning with the day's catch. "Happy?" he asked simply, as he did most evenings when they had a moment alone together. "Very," she replied, meaning it completely. Their marriage had settled into a rhythm of quiet satisfaction, passion tempered by genuine affection, romance grounded in shared purpose. They'd learned each other's habits and preferences, discovered unexpected compatibilities, and built something that felt solid as the hearthstone warming their home. "I received word today from a merchant captain," Stenvar said, his arm circling her waist. "He's commissioning a new trading vessel, wants it ready by spring. The largest project I've taken on since we settled here." "That's wonderful news. Will you need apprentices?" "1 or 2, perhaps. The work will take most of the winter, but the payment will secure our future well beyond anything we might need." Astrid leaned against his solid warmth, watching the fishing boats navigate the harbour entrance with practiced ease. Financial security had been one of many gifts their marriage had brought. Stenvar's skills were in high demand along the coast, and their modest needs left room for both comfort and generosity. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, "about expanding the herb garden next spring. Grandmother Solveig says there's always need for well-prepared medicinal supplies in the coastal towns. I could develop a small trade in healing herbs. You want to work with the healer? I want to contribute something of my own to our household. You have your shipbuilding, Freya has her lessons and carving. I need more than keeping house, even though I love making our home." Stenvar was quiet for a moment, considering. "You'd be good at such work. You have gentle hands and a patient manner with sick things. Remember how carefully you tended your daughter during that terrible journey?" "That feels like another lifetime," Astrid mused. 3 desperate people thrown together by circumstance, none of us knowing what we'd find. And what did we find? She turned in his arms to face him directly, studying the weathered features that had become so dear to her. "We found that broken things can be mended, that love comes in many forms. That family is what you choose to build, not just what you're born into." From inside the house came the sound of Freya practicing a song. Stenvar had taught her an old sea chanty about homecoming that seemed particularly fitting as the fishing boats settled into. "Harbour for the night. No regrets?" Stenvar asked, his pale eyes serious despite the gentle smile playing around his mouth. "Only that it took so long to find you," Astrid replied honestly, "and that we needed such dramatic circumstances to bring us together." "Perhaps that's how the best things happen," he said thoughtfully. "Not through careful planning, but through responding to crisis with courage and choosing to see possibilities instead of just problems." As they stood together watching the sun set over their chosen home, Astrid fingered the iron ring that had become as natural on her finger as breathing. Their foundation was solid as the hearth. Stone built from tested love, shared trials, and the daily choice to continue building something beautiful from the broken pieces of their separate pasts.